And then on the left-hand side is a pie chart giving you a visualization of where those expenses go. So the police department is the largest portion of our general fund, almost 39%, followed by refuse, which makes up about half of the Public Works office, the Public Works department, and then the fire department, street maintenance, which is the other half of the Public Works department, and then the administrative office, which is the clerk, treasurer, and mayor's account. So those are the funds that operate the goings-on in the village office. And then you can see the other portions include things like mayor's court operations, public buildings for repairs and maintenance of our public buildings, street lights for the village's gas lamps, and then other miscellaneous charges, for instance, things that the county auditor withholds to fund their services, traffic signs, traffic lights, storm sewer repair and replacement, and then the village's payment to the county health department to be involved in the county health department operation throughout Hamilton County. So that gives you an idea of where the general fund money is distributed and where the village's expenses are when it comes to each individual department's operations. Sir? How many personnel in that third graph? So there are 13 non-police employees, and that does include 4 utility employees, so you'd have 9 general fund employees, and then you would have, Craig, what are you at now, 6 officers?
Present time 6. Should be 7.
7 full-time officers and 4 part-timers?
4 to 5.
4 to 5 part-timers are included in that group. About 20 employees, yeah. Mm-hmm. Moving on to the next slide. Anyone who followed along with the budget-making process in December of last year is aware of where these numbers are coming from, and we've discussed them in earlier slides here, so just brings it all together to give an idea of what the village's financial picture for 2022 is estimated to be. The first line here is our estimated revenues. So that number is what Hamilton County has informed us we can anticipate to receive within that 83% of our revenue in property taxes, in addition to what we estimate we will receive for that other 17% of miscellaneous revenues during the year. The 2022 appropriations, again, that includes all departments that were reviewed on the previous page, personnel and operations, and then the contingency that I mentioned. So that brings us to an estimated 2022 deficit of about $97,000, almost $98,000. Now, in budgetary discussions, there is another source of revenue that the village does receive, but we are unable to put it in any kind of formal budget document because the county can't verify that we're going to receive it. We refer to it as the holdback. Hamilton County holds back 3% of our property tax revenue in the event that someone doesn't pay their property taxes. So they don't distribute that to us to make up for someone not making payments on their property taxes. Luckily, the village of Glendale, and I'd like to think we're pretty unique in this regard, we have a very, very high payment rate of our property taxes. So we are able to rely on that money coming available to us every year. The county circulates it to us once they hit a certain percentage of property tax payment. So in the yellow box at the bottom of that 4th page, gives you where the village's estimated 2022 deficit will end up at the end of the year at $33,500. So flipping over to the next page, we spent a lot of time talking about 2022. Now we're going to look forward a little bit. So this graph is a graph that indicates the anticipated surplus or deficit for the general fund beginning in 2022, so that 33.5 number that I just mentioned, projected forward through 2028. So this graph at 18.5 mils indicates what we project to be the outcome without any additional income tax, property tax increases. So that shows you where we project our deficit to be by the time we hit 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026, 27, 28. Now, those projections are based on a number of things. Our property tax receipts do not go up based on increased property values. Our levies are capped at a certain amount. So our income from the county, that 83% of our general fund only increases when we have things like new construction or building permits. Property tax valuations going up does not impact our revenue. And our expenses are, of course, impacted by inflation, which is, everyone's pretty aware of how that's trending recently. So those projections take into account where we anticipate inflation will go over the next 5-6 years here. So that indicates no change in our property tax receipts, just a simple renewal of the 8.5 this year in November. The next page. I'm sorry. Yes. No, those are each individual year. They do. That is included. So, like I said, it's included because it gives a more realistic picture, but if you look at it without it, so what we would submit to the county with our official budget documents, that wouldn't be included, so it would be a different number, a lower number, or rather a higher number, I guess. Lower or negative, I don't know, whatever. You know what I mean. 2.5 mils additionals, the next chart here. This is the 6th page. I'm sorry. This is the 5th page. It's out of order here on this board. I apologize, but it looks like this for everyone following along with their own packets. So this assumes a 2.5 additional millage property tax to be implemented, payable in 2023 based on property evaluations in 2022. So the way that the county collects property taxes is you have your tax year and then you have your payable year. 2023, your tax year is 2022. So the village would, if this is pursued, it would be based on property values in 2022 and payable in arrears in 2023. So this gives an idea of where those projections will span out over that period of time. Now, to your question, this does include the rollback. These are not cumulative, so these are each individual year. It is worth mentioning that rollback will adjust based on any property tax increase, so it is 3% of our total receipts. So as you can see, 2023, 24, and 25, we anticipate a surplus. Beginning in 2026, again, we start to trend towards a deficit with 2.5 additional. Any questions on that? Sir? Correct. These all assume a full year of revenue. So if millage were to be approved in the beginning of another year or for only a half year, then we would have to adjust those projections to reflect that, but they would be reduced, obviously, because we're only collecting a half year for taxes. Yes. Sir. So, as I said, these are not cumulative. So what each of these bars shows is each of those years on their own. So what our anticipated revenues would be, and then our anticipated expenditures, and what the difference between those numbers is. So while it would offset in some sense, we would end the year with, as based on this projection in 2023, an additional $147,000 from what we've projected our expenses to be based on our current situation. So this is no changes in services, no additional expenses, no additional personnel, just based on continuing our operations going forward. That surplus is what would exist in 2023, 24, 25, and then switching to deficit again in 2026. Yeah, so the 2026 would just be 2026 revenues minus 2026 expenditures. It would, and it would be impacted on a different number, which is our year-end balance for our general fund reserves. But in order to get an idea of how each year would balance out over the course of setting our budgets and setting our projections, We're looking at each year individually so that we would know in that year what would we anticipate our revenues and then our expenses to be. Now we can, of course, you're right, we can of course take a look at them all combined and figure out where that net is over that 6-year time period. But for the purposes of these graphs, we're just showing those deficits or revenues in each individual year. So, heading to the next slide here. Oh, yes. Sir, or I don't know who had it up first, I'm sorry. So, sure, so the village has about 1.2 million in reserves. That is money that represents previous year's surpluses. That money is kept in that reserve account. The practice has been keeping that funding in our reserve account so that in the event of some catastrophic event, we need that money to be available. We have a major roadway issue, major infrastructure issue, we need that funding to be available. Then we're able to draw that down in a year and rely on that money to meet that need without having to worry about emergency increases in our revenues. No, it's difficult to explain in this setting, if only because there are so many moving parts that impact it, but it is that kind of that continuous balance, so it doesn't exist in one set account, but it is a figure that we use year over year to indicate where we are as far as what we've spent over what we have or what we've earned over what we've spent. I understand that it can be confusing. I'm happy to sit down with anybody and go on this a little bit longer, but what's that? It is real money. Could I go write a check for it right now? No. The only reason being that because when we set our budgets, we have over the course of all those years what we've received in revenues and then what we've spent in expenditures. And then there's that balance that remains that in the event next year that we have an unexpected expense, for instance, a good example is this year we have an unexpected $60,000 expense for EMS service that we're being provided by the city of Sharonville. In order for us to be able to provide that service and pay that expense, we're able to rely on those reserves. Another example is the paving of Sharon Road. We were able to pull from those reserves to complete part of that work because that money was available to us and was held from previous surpluses in the past. Is there any other? I saw your hand, yeah. You're fine. Correct. So, yeah, absolutely. So when when a property tax is passed, we certify to the county auditor, the county auditor certifies to us, rather, what the property valuation is in the village at the time that we would put that levy up on the ballot. And then they say that whatever the millage, which is the percentage of that valuation that the village would receive, that is the maximum amount that we can receive for that levy from here on until what is known as a renewal. The issue with this and what we've been discussing in finance and some folks are aware of is that you receive sort of a rebate on your property tax payments because our levies were grandfathered in. The state made a change in 2016 to how they collect property taxes, how the counties collect property taxes and forward them to the state. And I know that sounds like nonsense, but at that point, any levy that would be renewed now that that rule has been changed, that rebate would disappear. So now that would be something that the taxpayer would pay and that the village would not receive any additional revenue. No, if we renew, if the 8.5, yes, so just to make sure I understand it, that if the 8.5 is renewed in November, just hypothetically, then the village would receive additional revenue because that levy was renewed and values have gone up. Correct. If the levy is replaced is when we would receive additional revenue. A renewal simply says we're going to continue to receive this revenue. It's sufficient for our needs. It's based on the property valuations at the time that it was passed. And then that is the maximum amount of money that the village can receive. Now, on the other side of that is that unfortunately, they set a ceiling that we can't go above, but they sure didn't set a floor. So as property valuations go down, if they ever do or when they do, the revenue that the village receives does go down as well. So it works one way but not the other. So a renewal of a levy does not increase the amount of revenue that the village receives. Anyone else? Okay. So to introduce this next piece, which is this graph here, and someone can help me out with the page count, I'm sorry, but number 7, I believe? 6, 8. Yeah, whatever. You know where we are. This graph right here. This represents the projections, the same projections, years in a vacuum, in a sense, in the event that the village were to enact a 0.5% income tax. Now, that is I'm sure we'll get a lot of discussion about that tonight, and I'm happy to answer those to the best of my knowledge and the best of my ability. But I'm going to talk about these projections, and then we'll get into the details of that. So, beginning in 2022, same deficit that we've been discussing, about 33.5. Now, in 2023, we anticipate a larger deficit. The reason for that is because this assumes an income tax and the renewal of the 8.5 mil levy and the renewal of the 10 going forward. The renewal of our existing property tax levies in addition to a 0.5% income tax. So in 2023, we would anticipate a deficit if only because the collection of an income tax is delayed by a year because we would not receive a significant portion of the revenue until folks file their income taxes in 2024. So the village could anticipate some slight revenue from estimated payments, quarterly payments, but realistically, the largest portions of our revenue would be received by the village in 2024 based on 2023 earnings. So that's why you see that sharp dip and then the sharp rise up. Yes, sir. So the income tax is assessed by an organization known as RETA. We would defer to them to administer our income tax. The state of Ohio has set the taxable items, and there's a list on RETA's website of what is taxable. For just a summary purpose, hourly wages, tips, those kinds of things would be taxable. Social Security would not be distributions would not be taxable. Dividends, stock dividends would not be taxable. IRA and other distributions would not be taxable. So for all intents and purposes, it would be your typical wage, which is, I believe, box 14 on everybody's W-2, or any additional income from perhaps like renter's income, Schedule C or Schedule D income. There are a few other kind of isolated sources here and there, but for the most part, it would be wages and tips. Yes, sir. So, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Well, get your shots in now, I guess. Sir. So these projections assume that the income tax would be effective on income beginning on January 1st, 2023. So of course, if we move it out, or like you question about the property tax, that if we do a half year or a certain portion of the year, of course those projections would shift, but it would be relative. So you could assume how much we would receive on a half year versus a full year, and then how that would impact projections going forward for tax receipts. The largest collection of revenue would arrive in the spring of 2024, when folks file their income taxes, in April, like they do every year. Yes. That is a very, very good question that I do not have on my charts in front of me right here. I'd be happy to answer that, maybe talk with you a little bit more. Sure. Uh-huh. I can repeat them. Yep. So the first question was, and I'm gonna miss the detail, but it was a Schedule C and pass-through entities. Is that correct? And the answer to that is that I would have to look into that individual tax scenario and see what we would anticipate. Based on my understanding of what Rita has identified through state law as taxable, that would be, but I'm not sure. I don't want to commit to that answer right here, right now, but I'll be happy to look into it and we could have a discussion later on. Your other question was regarding, I'm sorry, remind me. Yes. So this is a concept, I remembered broke my own rule. That's where I'm headed. So no, you're fine. The question is an income tax paid to another community credited under this projection? So for instance, City of Cincinnati has an income tax of 1.8%. If this income tax at 0.5% were to be implemented in the village, that would assume no credit, no reciprocity for taxes paid elsewhere. So what that means is that you would be taxed in the community in which you work, so in the City of Cincinnati, that would be withheld directly from your paycheck and paid directly to the city. And then there would be an additional 0.5% that would be paid to the village of Glendale that you could either elect to have withheld from your employer or you would pay on your own, when you go to file your taxes. So a number of communities offer credits. Typically, they are communities with larger commercial bases because folks working in the communities don't receive the credit from the community in which they work. So they would only receive the credit potentially in the community in which they live. So that would be where that reciprocity that would come into effect there. So any other questions about that as we go through? Will we tax people who work in Glendale? Yes. People that work in Glendale will be taxed, and they will have, that will be automatically deducted from their withheld from their paychecks and then paid to the village. Yes. I'm sorry, let me ask the question. He asked if those working in the village would be taxable all the same that those living in the village would be, and the answer is yes. Yes, ma'am. So I'm not gonna say the word hope. You're asking if we're hoping for the income tax and the renewal of the property tax levy. That's not what I'm presenting on right here, right now. And it's a good question, and one that I would defer to the village's elected officials and our discussion here tonight as we identify potential projects that could be funded by that kind of revenue. This information is only involved and only shown to indicate how the village's finances could be affected by these new revenue sources. So, any other? I would say that from my position, I don't know if we're considering one or the other or both. That was a question. I would say from my position, I don't know that that's necessarily where what I would be able to answer. I think that as we project forward, we have to look at every potential option and every potential calculation as to how we can address, what appears on that fifth slide there of our deficit going forward. But as far as what options are available, it really is at the village's discretion and council's discretion of what potential revenue generation options are selected. Sure. So that property is privately owned. Oh, I'm sorry. A question about the landmark property and what's being done there. That property is privately owned by the church. So as far as development of that property is concerned, if developers come forward with proposals, the village, can receive and consider them, but at this time, there's nothing that's under consideration. Mhm. So that is a very good question. Why wouldn't we look at the landmark property for development, for expansion of residential housing, or perhaps even some other use? And that is a very, very good question, and is one that, when there is a proposal that has maybe a number of houses, potential residents, potential uses attached to it, we can come up with revenue generation and estimates on what that would generate for the village. But right now, there's nothing that I'm aware of that's in the works for that property that we could act forward on and make a projection on going forward. Is it privately owned or partially owned by Glendale? It is all privately owned. Correct. It is all privately owned. Correct. The village does not own any acreage on the landmark property. What's that? What is it that the village of Glendale could consider for the landmark property? If a development proposal is brought forward to the village, then at that point, we would consider that development proposal. I'm sure some folks in the room were aware of the Dries proposal back about 2016 that was on that property. There were projections that were run for that proposed development. It did show that it would generate enough tax revenue to operate itself effectively, but there were a number of other issues that were going on with that property development, and there, kind of it's a long story, to use a phrase, but that information would be available if there was a housing development or any other development. I am not going to be able to answer that question or address that comment, simply because I was there as well on a part-time intern basis, so I would defer to some other folks in the room as far as Dries being stonewalled or anything like that. Sir?
How often is financial information provided to the council to act on? And when it is there a balance sheet that shows any type of restriction on an investment in cash?
So how often... How often is financial information provided to council? Financial information is provided to council on a regular basis. Depends on the kind of information. Every month, council receives check registers, which are a listing of the checks written in that month for their approval. Through the finance committee and through council meetings, things like revenue and expenditure reports, as well as cash balance reports, are generated and circulated to the council. And that kind of information is made available publicly when it's generated. So our website does have that information on it if you're interested, or I'd be happy to talk with you further about it. Sir? There are no properties that are owned by the village that would generate, would you say, $1 to $2 million going forward? No, there are no properties owned by the village that would generate that kind of tax revenue for the village. Mm-hmm. Are there properties available that could be developed to generate revenue for the village? I suppose for the right price, any piece of property could be made available. However, right now, there aren't any, to our knowledge, that are significant enough to generate the kind of revenue that would close up these deficits. Glendale Avenue behind Princeton is about 10 acres, that property at the corner of Walnut and Glendale. Is that what you're referring to? Now, there is a caveat to that piece of property. If those a year and a half ago, the Community Improvement Corporation was considering the development of that property for what are known in the marketing world as lifestyle homes, single-story, kind of aging-in-place facilities, homes that are maintained by HOAs, that kind of a development. Through a title search, the village discovered that property has a deed restriction that limits it to recreational use only. Was the condition on which the village received that property. I don't have the year in front of me. I don't know the year off the top of my head, but unfortunately with something like deed restrictions, those are unbreakable. You would not be able to circumvent something like that. So, any other questions here? Sir. Was the Glendale Community Improvement Corporation soliciting for developers in 2016? No, the Community Improvement Corporation did not exist in 2016. Was Glendale soliciting for development when Dries made their proposal for the Landmark property? To my knowledge, no, because Dries contacted Landmark as the private owner of the property and made a proposal for a purchase and development of the property, which they then brought to the village for consideration and approval. I'm sorry? I mean, it was made in PowerPoint, yes. So, but it is, I mean, printed and available for everybody to have a copy of. So, I'm sorry, so back to, oh, yes, sir. Yes. Sure. So that number is anywhere from 850,000 to 925,000. What is the estimated receipts, and where does that information come from? Was the question. That number is anywhere from 850 to 925,000. Now that comes to the village directly from the Regional Income Tax Authority or Agency, RETA. They have a number of communities they have a number of communities in Hamilton County that use them for the collection of income tax, as well as throughout the state of Ohio. They collect demographic information, wage information, information available to them through the state and federal income tax agencies to generate what they believe to be a picture of the village, and based on income tax that they may collect in other communities from village residents, that they generate that estimate for us to be able to make these kinds of projections on. So that's where that number comes from. It comes from them and their research that says what they estimate those receipts to be. Yes, thank you, Will. That's a very good point. That 850,000 number, the question was, that represents 1%. That does represent 1% income tax. So a 0.5% income tax would be half of that, so about 425,000 is the estimate that we're using here. I don't have that demographic data in front of me, the percentage of wage earners versus retirees in the village. I know that, I believe, I don't want to toss a question to you, Amy, but I know you had done some work on that and pulled some of that data. I don't know that it included anything as specific as retirements or. The median age in Glendale is 49, is what Amy has said, and I believe, and Amy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that from my observation is that Glendale is getting a larger number of younger families, and more children in the village, so that number, median age, we anticipate will go down slightly over the next few years. So. Yes, ma'am. So what is the income tax percentage in surrounding communities compared to the 0.5% that we're discussing here? It depends on the community. As I said, City of Cincinnati is 1.8%. City of Norwood is 2%. Other communities, Springdale is 2%. Green Hills is 1.5%. So they have larger percentages, but Wyoming is 1.5%. So Woodlawn is 2.3%. I don't know if anybody else has any more. Shout them out. I'll repeat them. But anywhere between that, like 1.5% to 2.5% range. So, state law, how often can that income tax percentage go up? So state law does allow for the implementation of up to 1% without a ballot measure. Now, going forward, anything beyond that or anything up to 1% would require a ballot measure that you would vote on at the polls. So that would be presented all the same that the property tax levies are. The language would be a little different, but it would be voted on all the same. Up to 1%. Up to 1%. If it's up to 1%, it does not require a vote, but anything above 1% would require a vote. Yes, sir. Yes. So what makes an income tax preferable compared to a property tax? The main benefit is, as we stated earlier when we were talking about property taxes, that the county sets the ceiling of revenue that the village is able to receive, whereas an income tax has no such ceiling and is based on wage increases for those who pay it. So, for instance, if your employer gives you a 3% or 2%, whatever COLA increase, then your income tax would adjust proportionally, and then the village's revenue would adjust proportionally. So as we project out on this 0.5% income tax, we use 3% as the estimated increase every year. Okay. No, and it's not. It is not free money. You're right. It is something that is paid to the village, and as your wages increase, so too does the percentage of the amount of income tax that you pay. The percentage would remain the same, but the amount would increase. Yes, sir. So for these projections, and we can discuss what those projections are. I unfortunately don't have any of those printed out here tonight. We were, looking at 0.5%. The question was, why not go with a 1% income tax and use those projections going forward? Those would generate a significant amount of revenue. That is a very true fact about an income tax like that high, that percentage. So those aren't included in these projections, but we have calculated out what we estimate those projections would be, and that's something that we can make available if folks are interested in, or we could discuss as tonight goes on and address those questions specifically. Yeah, that's the short answer. I'll just keep talking and, 2 times. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. So the question was, at 1%, we would be the lowest of adjoining communities, and based on the data that's available to me, that answer is correct, or very, very close to correct. And also, we are the only community with 0. Is that not also correct? I'm sorry to say that, but that is not correct. We are not the only community with a 0% income tax or no income tax. Cleves, Terrace Park, and North Bend are the other communities in Hamilton County. Oh, adjoining communities? Yes, adjoining communities, correct. We are the only community with a 0% income tax. 3.5. Well, that's the.
Work in Cincinnati, I know in Glendale it's gonna be incremental, half a percent, but people in Blue Ash or Springdale or someplace else, are none of those have reciprocity?
So those communities do have reciprocity. She was asking if other communities like Springdale, Blue Ash have reciprocity. While I don't have the exact figures in front of me, those communities do have reciprocity. It's like I said, because those communities do have a large commercial base, so they have a large number of taxpayers within their boundaries that pay that tax at the full amount, regardless of, you know, any kind of credit or anything like that. So to your point, sir, about, you know, you pay 2% in another community, you know, would this 0.5% just go on top of that? The answer is yes. And then, whereas, you know, if the situation were reversed, or if the village were to offer some kind of reciprocity, then that amount would be reduced, but so too would the village's receipts. Just to kind of give folks an example of that, if the village, and this is based on RETA data, if the village had a 1% income tax and offered full reciprocity, the village's estimated receipts would be anywhere from $125,000 to $200,000 every year. Correct, versus $850 to $925 annually. Yes, sir.
In response to your question about 0.5% and 1%, it's very deceptive because really this is income that's being taxed twice at the municipal level for anybody who works outside of Glendale. So, you know, everybody's being taxed if you're in Springdale 2% plus a 0.5%. And you can't just look at it like it's a 1% is the lowest because it's really not. It's 1% plus whatever you're paying outside the area. So it really takes you off there. And my concern about it is will people say, if you move to Glendale, you're going to be double taxed on municipal income, which I don't think is a good thing.
So the question or the comment was about it being that the income tax would effectively tax your income twice where you work and then here in Glendale where you live. And you are correct that income would be taxed at two rates that would be combined if you work outside of Glendale and then live within Glendale and the village were to offer no credit, no reciprocity. So that would be correct. That total tax percentage would be those two numbers together. So the question was, is Princeton preparing to put another tax levy on the ballot? And the answer is, not to my knowledge, no. Organizations have until the beginning of August to submit ballot measures. But I would, from my perspective, I would think that if Princeton were pursuing something like this, that there would already be communication about it and information made available to the school district. Yes, ma'am. Yep. So the question is, if you work in Blue Ash, you pay a certain percentage. You live in Glendale, you pay an additional percentage. Who gets it first? Technically, Blue Ash would, because that revenue would be withheld from your paycheck automatically because your company is located within Blue Ash. So they would have to, your company, your employer would have to report that to the city of Blue Ash through their income tax office. Then you could either choose to have the Glendale tax withheld, or you could just go ahead and take your chances during tax season. No, it's, now I understand your question, that the percentage, the question is, would the available revenue, the available income to be taxable, be reduced by the community in which you work taking their tax out first? The answer is no. On your W-2, there's one number that's used by both communities, where you work, where you live, to generate what your income tax is owed to that community. So you would pay whatever percentage for each community of that number. Yes, ma'am. Hmm? That is an option under state law. Now that's where I'm gonna stop my answer, because that is that's more discussion fit for elected officials. Correct. It is available to the village as an option. That is correct. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was that the council can act or can vote on an up to 1% income tax without voter input, and the answer is yes. But as far as anything beyond that, I obviously defer to the elected officials of the village. Sorry, guys. For real estate taxes, no. Has to be voted on, because we have exceeded what we're allowed to assess on our own. Sir. So the question is, do we have a number for how many folks work and live within the village, whether it's a work from home situation or maybe they work in one of the village businesses? And as far as a specific number of those folks, we do not, but we're able to identify how many folks would be considered as employees within the village and what that would generate. And that was the number that I said earlier, at 1% would be employees of village businesses, meaning those that work within the village, whether it's work from home or in a village business, would generate at a 1% income tax about $75,000 to $100,000 for the village. Any other questions as we move on? Sir. Mm-hmm. So I'd be happy to run through, the question is, going back to the general fund revenue sources diagram, what compromises that 17%? What did I say? Comprises. I've been talking for a while. You know what? Give me a second. Thank you. What's that? So what comprises, thank you, that additional 17% of revenue that the village receives to the general fund? So looking at our 22 budget, some of the largest items on there are the trash and recycling fee that folks pay on their utility bills every quarter. That is revenue received into the general fund, and that totals about $200,000, so there's about half of that. Now, that amount is set by our agreement with Rumpke for trash collection services, so that's not something that we would just increase arbitrarily. That would increase based on our contract agreement with Rumpke, and would offset that price that we pay for village residents to receive that service. Other items included in there are things like there's a tax allocation for utility equipment and infrastructure in the village that's operated by organizations like Cincinnati Bell and Spectrum. So they pay a certain amount to the county that gets distributed to the village. Additionally, like I said, court fines, court costs, garage sale permits. The other things that are in there also include franchise fees that are paid to the village that pay out to ICRC to provide the service that they're providing for us tonight, which is live broadcast online and on TV of our public meetings and public events like the Memorial Day Parade. Additionally, things like the village's revenue that we receive for the renting of the CF Bank building next door to the village office. So those are things that are into that number. Now, as far as increasing those individual items, yes, there are always opportunities to investigate doing that. But at 17% of our budget, it only does make up a small percentage of our estimated revenues. Sir. So are you referring to this chart, the departmental expenses? No. Page 2. So the question was displaying data, breaking down each department by each of these percentages and what's paid out for instance, police department's personnel versus operation and materials costs. And of course that data can be made available, can be generated. Don't have it with me here tonight. However, we can take a look at what each individual department's personnel costs are and operational costs are. Now, of course, that is going to vary by department. Of course, the police department is going to have higher personnel costs than the fire department. Public Works is going to have certain cost differences compared to the administration office. So those kinds of expenses are dependent on each department. We can certainly break that information down if it's helpful to answer those questions for folks who have them. Sir. Mm-hmm. And it is available. The budget is available online. GlendaleOhio.org and Mike Bogrand here is plugging his own section of the web page under the treasurer section. It does have our full budget document available for viewing online. And if anyone has any questions or wants to go over it more specifically, be more than happy to do so. And just reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer those questions.
So, Dave, I've asked a lot of questions. I just want to say I love Glendale. I moved here on purpose. So, do you have any idea of how efficient we are as a community in our expenditures per capita or whatever measure we use compared to adjoining communities?
So the question is how efficient the village is on its expenditures per capita versus another community. What I will say is that there is opportunity to investigate that number. Of course, being a largely residential community, there are larger expenses than another community like perhaps Blue Ash with a larger commercial base. There are certain levels of service that exist for residential communities, or mostly residential communities, versus more commercial communities like Blue Ash, Montgomery, something like that. So that data could be calculated, could be made available, but of course you have to take into consideration what makes up each community and what those different service needs are. Of course, things like public works departments across those communities and police and fire services across those communities as well.
I appreciate that. For me personally, if I understood that we were efficient, voting yes doesn't make this as much easier.
I understand that. And it does, to repeat your question or your comment, it does make it easier to vote on something like a tax increase, whichever side it may be on, if folks know that the village is operating as efficiently as it can. And I will say that from my perspective, that in our office we've been working to find ways to get work done more quickly, to get questions, concerns addressed as fast as we can, as completely as we can, make more available online, you know, to cut down time spent on projects, on, you know, the things that take us day to day, just so that we are able to take on more, we're able to engage more, and, you know, that opens up things like pursuing grant funding opportunities that we might not have available to us because we were spent doing maybe routine tasks or something like that, just as an example. The other example that I would give, and I know we've had this discussion, and Nancy, as the chair of the fire committee, can attest to this as well, is that when it comes to the operations of the fire department, that the village has the best bang for its buck as far as providing fire service to its residents when you compare the cost per capita to provide that service. So the village is always finding ways to make itself more efficient and use our taxpayers' dollars as best we can to continue to provide the services that we do. Sir. So the question is it more of is all this discussion about potential new revenue sources, potential projections for that revenue, is that all sustaining existing services, or is that allowing for new services, new projects? And I think that's the second half of tonight's meeting, as we kind of get into that conversation and seeing where the village wants to head. You know, as folks have, I'm sure, looked through their packets, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you know, there are a number of projects that the village can undertake that require additional funding and additional revenue. You know, some of them are things that we're going to have to contend with, we're going to have to pursue to maintain our infrastructure. And other ones are amenities and things that make the village a more attractive and interesting place to live. So I think it depends on the revenue path that's selected. To say whether it be just a sustainability or maybe an expansion of services or an expansion of projects to be considered. Oh, now I understand your question. Are these numbers based on sustainability? So these numbers are based on continuing projections plus inflation of our existing services as they are today. Living status quo. Yes, sir. So the comment was that on the last page of the packet, there's a number of projects that could be pursued in the event of additional funding that, you know, when we look at these financial projections, you know, may seem unnecessary, I believe was the word that you used. And that, you know, that's certainly, you know, that is certainly an opinion and something that we're going to get into that. So just for the sake of everybody in the room and everybody at home, her comment was that she doesn't want, if it's like a 1% income tax, I think I heard, or any number, whatever it may be in addition to what exists today, expressed that she wouldn't want it to go to any of the projects on the last page of the packet. Now, of course, that's a very valid opinion and is something that we will have an opportunity, that people in this room will have an opportunity to discuss as we move on through tonight's meeting. So, yeah. So the clarifying comment there was that as the village projects operating at a deficit, that to list these projects seems, I'm trying to think of the best word to capture the comment here. Yeah, it's just not, it's not the appropriate point to bring those potential projects forward. And like I said, that will be the second half of tonight's meeting as we get through this projection, and you can, you know, have those conversations. But our projections going forward are our existing services as they are today. So anything on those last 3 pages of this packet would be potentially in addition to the existing revenue or surpluses or deficits that the village could expect. So I'm going to jump to the I think the final projection here. Yes, sir.
Mike? Excuse me, Mike. No, Mike. Would you go up to the mic? No, Mike, go to the mic.
Yeah, so what I was saying is, the question was, I'm going to. So the question was, are we being efficient with the money, and how do we benchmark compared to other communities? And again, that's very difficult to do because we're a very small community. Some communities are much larger. They have more dollars to work with. You know, just look at Evendale, and they have surplus along with everything else they provide. So we are being very careful with the dollars. One of our largest expenses are salaries, and our salaries across the board are in the mid to low mid range for almost all of our employees. The police department has salaries that are they're set based on time and grade, so different position, different number of years of service equates to a certain salary. We have to keep up with that. It also happens occasionally on public works. If a guy gets a certification, you're kind of obligated to put him at mechanic level if he's passed that certification. So we are very careful with the salaries. As far as everything else that we're doing, I made the comment we're squeezing every penny out of every dollar we receive to where we are just keeping up with the services we should provide. There are, for example, the green belts are not being maintained as well as we would like, and that's because we just do not have the man hours, and for Nancy, the people hours, to put towards that. So the deficit that we're projecting is very real. And the last comment I was going to make is if you look on the slide that is this one, this passes the 8.5 mil existing levy, okay? And no additional levy, one or the other, that's been discussed. So prior to tonight, 3 weeks ago, that deficit looked like about a $170,000 number. And through some creativity by David and our other staff, we've got it down to 136. David has made some changes in his office staffing, and we've also made some changes in Public Works where we'll likely be able to address the green belts and keep those cleaned up, but not affect, or with existing funds, not additional funds would be needed to do that. So we are doing everything we can. And this deficit, again, is very real, and we need to do something to increase the revenue that we're receiving now in order to continue to function. And I don't know how much longer I'm allowed, but I'll take the one question, I'll go sit down. Because that's a follow-up to yours, yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. No. No, okay, and let me answer it a different way. Let me answer it a different way. So are we at a market head count on our employees? And this is what I will say. Police, we are staffed adequately, I think. Close. All right.
I say we're close.
And here's what we like on the police. Even on the night shift, we'd like to have 2 people. One in the car, one at the office. We don't want a guy working by himself, okay? For Public Works, we have made some changes with some outsourcing potentially. We probably could still use a part-time on Public Works even with that change. And without that change, we would need 1 more person on Public Works, where we've been a man short all this year. So that's where we are. So does that answer it?
Well, no, I'm sorry. 20 employees, 2,200 residents,
Sure.
1 per 100?
Yeah.
How does that compare to other residents?
That I cannot answer. I don't know. My approach to this is more what gets the work done and provides the services that Glendale is used to. Now, here's one thing. Public Works used to have about 4 more people than what they have today. I understand, and I'm trying to answer it as best I can for what's relevant tonight. Okay, thank you, thank you.
All right. I'll
So, per Mr. Vessel, the main deficit is from infrastructure and salaries. Why hasn't Glendale requested funding or support or consultation from the state of Ohio to help, not necessarily assist, but maybe consult to help manage these issues or budgetary concerns?
So the question is, why hasn't the village worked with the state of Ohio to address personnel salary issues? So the village takes advantage of as many grant opportunities as we're capable of qualifying for and capable of applying for to pursue projects. You know, an example is the traffic light grant, the SORTA traffic light grant that we're going to be replacing the traffic lights at Route 4 in Sharon this year. So that project is underway. That's a 90-10 match. So that's a $350,000 project that the village is only responsible for 10%. On the personnel side, though, there's very, very little that's available from the state as far as assisting with salaries and assisting with benefit payments. You know, those are things that the communities themselves are responsible for. But as far as large-scale infrastructure projects and those sorts of things, the village does what it can to pursue any grant opportunities to make those projects more realistic and more attainable for the village. Sir.
Please forgive me, I'm Glendale's newest resident. The rest of the community has been many years. I just got here not too long ago. But it's a historic village, kind of covering like kind of what you were saying. Do you get any federal money being a historic village?
Is there any Is there any federal money available for historic villages as far as public entities operating to to maintain or improve the village? No. For private property owners, those kinds of opportunities are available through the state and through the Department of the Interior. But for public entities, there's very, very little that's available. So there's one more question, then I'm going to get to my final graph here. So the comment was about the village's public records policy and the availability of records. The village does maintain state-approved public records policies, schedules, that any records that exist that residents would like to request, or anyone would like to request, all they have to do is contact our office and we'll provide them what's available. Individual concerns about what records may or may not exist or may not be available aren't the topic tonight. So I'm going to move on to my next slide here, which is this one right here, which is presented as more of a reference point for folks. This slide here, again, as all of our projections have been this evening, is based on each individual year sort of in a vacuum as to what our revenues would be, our anticipated revenues, and then our anticipated expenditures. This includes a $4 million additional property tax. Now, I don't know that is something that's under serious consideration, but it does provide an opportunity when you look at where the village would end over time to where, more or less, where the village would end with a 0.5% income tax. So as far as available surplus at the end of this 7-year period, then we would end somewhere between where we are with a $4 million and then where we would be with a 0.5% income tax. So that just gives folks an idea of maybe how how those two taxing methods would relate to one another or compare to one another. I'm sorry, did your hand up? So the calculation of what does $4 million equate to $100,000 worth of valuation is actually, it's a lot simpler, because I had the same question for myself when I was preparing data for the finance committee earlier this year and contacted the county. It's a very simple equation. Each mill, so 1, 2.5, 4 times 35 is your per $100,000 valuation. So if we had a 1 mil property tax, then that times 35 per year per $100,000 in valuation. So $35 per $100,000 per year. So for a 2.5, it would be $87.50 per $100,000 per year. So, sir. Yes. So where does this deficit suddenly come from when we talk about maintaining our projections going forward? And the biggest answer, the best answer that I can give is inflation, and calculating so that the village is able to keep up with anticipated inflation percentages over time. Now, there are ways that we have been able to offset that. On the benefit side, for instance, village employees are in a benefits pool with a number of other communities, and we've enjoyed a 0% rate increase for the last 2 years on that benefits pool. So we do realize a not a reduction, but at least a status quo of amounts there. So that's one example. But really, as the village begins to contend with inflation and contend with our property tax levies that, as I said before, have that set amount that they can earn, then we're frozen in place with the revenues, but expenditures will continue to increase because of inflation year over year. So the no change over the previous 3 years. The village did receive there was some revenue that we received because of the COVID pandemic that offset police and fire expenditures for public safety. I could look at those numbers over the last 3 years and point out some more specific things. There were some savings on salaries and benefits with some retiring of some longer term village employees. But all in all, for the most part, as we move forward, we're going to be contending with inflation and contending with it more and more every year. So the question of why can't we use the reserves, like I said before, it is kind of a complicated one, and the reason is because the village is, if the village, think of it as if you have a job, you have income, you have a savings account. You could draw down on that savings account to maintain the operations of the village. But if your income doesn't keep up with your expenditures, then eventually, and you draw on that savings account enough, eventually that savings account will evaporate, putting the village into, in my opinion, perhaps a worse predicament, simply because we will not have that funding available to take on bigger projects or unexpected expenses as they come up. So I'm going to take a few more questions, and then we're going to move on to the next part of the meeting. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. So the question was the $60,000 for Sharonville EMS is an expenditure that the village was not anticipating. I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit, and that for a 10-year period, the village received its EMS service at no charge from the city of Springdale. And in 2021, Nancy's going to have to confirm that date for me, 2021, the city of Springdale came to us and came to the village and said, your operations are costing us X, and therefore we think that you need to compensate us X. That X was $325,000 a year. Obviously, the village was in no serious way going to tackle that as an option. So what we did was we went out to neighboring communities who had proximity to us to pursue EMS services. Sharonville, with their station located just at the end of at the corner of Chester and Kemper, was the closest and best equipped option for EMS service for the village. Now, they still do bill village residents for each individual EMS run as they occur. So, folks, if you do, have to unfortunately have that kind of event, then you will receive a bill from the city of Sharonville for that service. But as far as the ongoing operational costs to provide person hours, capital expenses, fuel, those sorts of things, those are all things that Sharonville receives in tax revenue from their residents and businesses, but doesn't receive from the village. It's except for this $60,000 annual payment that they've requested from the village, which, in comparison to $325,000, is a significant bargain for that level of service. It was unexpected in the sense that we didn't have it built into our projections. It wasn't unexpected as if it just came in the mail one day or something like that. But the Sharonville came to us after 1 year of service at no additional charge and said, okay, we've been running the numbers, and the village is going to have to contribute to our operations to continue this. So I don't know if there are any other lingering questions or anything like that. Got two hands up over here, and then I think I'm going to pass it back to Mayor Lofty, and we'll move on with our meeting. Sir.
Yeah, in the event that, let's
So the question is, if there's an additional millage, is there anything to stop council from putting on an income tax? Legally, the answer is no. So that would probably be where I would be most comfortable to conclude my answer. That legally, no, that 1% is available for the implementation of an income tax. I think, Larry, did you have your hand up, or no? Okay. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and I'm going to pass it over to Mayor Lofty and let him move on to our meeting. Thanks.
Wow. I'm not sure I can follow that. That was fantastic, David. And I'm just going to go over a few points here and then go into some of the ending slides in the presentation. There are a lot of different metrics that you could use to consider efficiency of a village government. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry about that. There are a lot of ways that you could measure efficiency. If you wanted to get an appreciation of it, you could attend some of the Finance Committee meetings where you can see people really sweating blood over the budgets, especially in October and November, as they look for ways to save money. I know one year we went all the way through the process. We had a budget that we thought was ready to go. It had a slight deficit in it, and one of our council members refused to pass it until we had gone back to another meeting to try to close that deficit, which we couldn't do, but we cut about 2 park benches, I think, out of the budget for total savings about $5,000, and that was the level that we were working at. You can certainly look at the fact that we haven't had a tax increase in 10 years, and that means that our tax revenue that from this property tax has not increased, because as David made so clear, even if the home values go up, the property tax revenue does not. We certainly, as Mike pointed out, we aim for to be in the middle of the pack with our employee salaries. Sometimes we hit that, sometimes we don't. I know we made an offer to try to hire a couple of workers for the summer, for our public works people, and at the money we were offering, nobody applied. In the end, we also we want to look at per capita tax revenue burden. How much are we really charging on a per household, per capita rate for taxes? So and we're going to look at that and as we go forward. I mean, we owe it to you to be transparent, to give you all the facts that we can get. This is the start. As I said in the beginning, this is the start of a conversation that the village has to look at. I'm going to take upon myself, just a completely different tack here, and say, well, you can see that if we continue at our current tax revenue, we're going to have deficits by all the projections we can get. And I can assure you that council, at least the people on council, have made their best efforts to avoid that over the years. As I say, it's taken us 10 years to get to this point. As David said, we got a little lucky. That good old COVID came along, and so a lot of money, some federal money came to us that is a one-off. We won't get it again, but it did help. We had some retirements, which ended up being replaced by people who made less money. And so that kind of kept us going for the last couple years. But we are now at a point where all the lucky things, we don't see anything lucky on the horizon, and what we are seeing is these very real deficits. If anything, they could be worse depending on what inflation does as going forward. We hope that won't be the case. But You will also see that a couple of the options have surpluses. And that's kind of where I'm heading in this next discussion here, is should we, there are people I know who have come to me ever since I've been mayor, and they have complained about the look and feel and ambience of the village, and they feel it just doesn't look the way they remember it looking, and what can you do about it, Mr. Mayor? And so that's kind of where I'm heading on this. We, in preparation for this meeting, and this was a real quick and dirty, throw something out on Facebook, talk to your friends. I had a couple of people who were good enough to volunteer to do this, and they asked residents, well, what would you do to improve the village? And so if you look at the first page that you really can't read on this chart here, but it says projects underway, and it lists a number of things that are now being done. This is, sorry, so I am very close to this thing, you got to understand. So this gives you some of the things that we are now doing. These are basically funded projects, or in some cases a privately funded project. So I'm not going to talk very much about that tonight, but I wanted to preserve these ideas that came from your neighbors, because they will be things that perhaps Glendale should be taken up in other forums, maybe committee meetings of council, so that you can say, oh, hey, here's some stuff that we can do that won't cost us very much money, and it would look better. And that goes to the next one, that could be completed with existing funding. That is not really true. We'd probably, some of them would require some additional funding. So for the most part, I don't propose to discuss these two pages here. I'm coming to the page that says infrastructure projects that require additional funding. And you can see there we have a number of different possibilities. Resurfacing of our streets, repaving, but that all has to come, in some cases that comes after replacement of water mains that are underneath the streets, because you really don't want to dig up your street or repave your street and then dig it up again a couple years later, replace a water main. We need to disconnect our stormwater system from our sanitary system. This is a shared cost between our enterprise fund, the ones that handle the water and sewer utilities, and our general fund. We're looking at possibility of a sidewalk on the along the Oak Road Greenbelt. We think there's some grant money to be had there, and I think we all know that there is a problem on that street. So we need to address it. There are some bridge replacements. People hardly know we have bridges in this town, but yes, we do. And so we're looking at that. Replacement playground equipment, both at Summit Park and Lake Park. We have now redone playground equipment at Washington Park and Cleveland Park. And so Summit is next on the list. And then I expect that Lake will follow at some point. Again, this is money. This is going to require, now, just understand, we go after grants as aggressively as we possibly can, and we're pretty good at getting them, but they almost all require matching funds. Sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes we get lucky and it's 90-10, but that doesn't happen very often. So we do need money to make these things happen, even if we're getting grants for them. We need to improve our stormwater management in a number of areas. We're working on, we'll hope to get a grant on signal upgrades. And, oh, the gas lamps. Somebody said, why don't we get rid of them completely? And I said, because I don't want to see torches and pitchforks outside of my house. So we won't be getting rid of them completely. They don't throw much light, but gosh, they look great. And then finally, a walking trail in the Oak Greenbelt. I've always wanted to do something like this, with some amenities and benches and whatever in there. So we are looking at that. Now there are some other types of projects too, and I'm just walking through here, and stop me if you see one you hate or one you like. Oh, don't do that. Oh, we got one, Mr. Parrish. Where are we spending $1.1 million? Meter replacement. Oh, yes. Well, that we have to replace our water meters periodically because they wear out, and so that is something that would come out of our enterprise fund, which is the water and sewer fund, which is funded by user rates. And so it's not coming out of the general fund that we're talking about here, but that doesn't mean it's not coming out of your pocket. I understand that. So we know okay, because they're totally different things. You can replace a meter and put it on an old pipe, and then later on replace that pipe at very little additional cost. Now, ideally, if we would like to have new pipes everywhere we put in new meters, but we just we don't have the funds to do that. So we're going to do, if we do see the need for new meters, we think there's going to be some advantage in staff time and staff usage, because the new meters would be automatically read and handle the billing automatically, and we would free up staff time in the office for other activities. Because the parking lots are in terrible shape. I mean, we really have, they're if you've ever been to the Summit Park and parked there, the asphalt is just ground up into pebbles for in many places, and so the parking lots need to be resurfaced. And when we do that, obviously, we're going to have to look at any effect that it might have on stormwater. But basically, that'll be a whole other issue to take on. I'm just going over some other things here. It was mentioned, wouldn't it be great if the village would go back to clearing snow from the sidewalks? We have a plow, and it's made for sidewalks. Truth, number one, it doesn't always work. We try to keep it going as best we can. The other thing is we have to clear the streets first, and and we have the manpower, person power to do just that. So we occasionally are able to free up somebody to do the sidewalks, but not as often as we would like. Somebody came up with the idea of a splash park. I don't know if you don't all know what that is, but basically it's a surface with kind of mini fountains coming up, and it's not a pool, so it doesn't present any kind of lifeguard need. Somebody said create a dog park somewhere in the village. This was one of my projects. I called it one of my pet projects, but people groaned when I said that. Love to see a dog park somewhere in the village. A July 4th fireworks like we used to. This goes back, no, this is important though to recognize. People who've lived here a long time have a nostalgia about the place, about what it used to be and what it isn't now. And they recognize changes like that. Like what now, I suspect that if we try to get fireworks in here, it'd be a lot more complicated than it used to be. The regulations are different, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't try. Somebody promoted back of the house trash pickup. Again, that's something we used to do. We had to stop doing it to save money. Community Wi-Fi in the square. I think that's probably a low-cost thing. We might be able to do that. In fact, we have it in part of the square, actually. You can, if you're close to the village office, you can pick up our Wi-Fi signal. Create a social media presence. You know, I think, I don't know how many of you were at the meeting last February on communications. And this, I'm telling you right now, this is an outgrowth of that meeting. We are trying to communicate. We are trying to be transparent. I mean, my gosh, you know, David is taking time away from his new twin boys to, you know, be here tonight, and we're very grateful for that. But I mean, he answered questions that did very well at him in that. So we're trying to be more transparent. We're trying to better communicate. This meeting is about better communication of where the village is at and what we're, where we might be going. And finally, you know, look at the entrances to the village. How could they be improved? Let people know when they're coming into let people know when they're coming into Glendale, and let them feel like, hey, this is really an interesting place. We have a great new area called Tollgate Park, right where Congress and Route 4 split, and it looks fantastic. There's a lot of great landscaping that was done there, and we expect that we'll be getting the ability to do something like that in the next year or two once ODOT is done with the project up at Sharon and Chester. So we'll be looking for that too. With that, I'm gonna, okay, are there any questions? Oh. Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Glad you asked that question. That's a very good one. The Finance Committee is having a meeting. The Finance Committee is having a meeting on next Monday, the 27th. Is that right? Okay. And that's at 3 o'clock? Okay. So 3 o'clock at the village office next Monday is the next thing that will happen. And we're going to, and it's not certainly the last thing that will happen. We're going to keep coming at you people. We're going to keep telling you more, giving you more information. We found out some things today that we didn't have, and we're going to get them. And we're gonna just bore you to death with the numbers and the information, and try and explain that where this village is going and where it can go. Right. Let me ask, if we opened up, well, how many of you would come to the Finance Committee next Monday? Looks like about 10. That's getting close, yeah. Okay, I'll talk to our finance chair about that, and we will put out a notice telling you where the meeting is, no matter what. Okay. Anything else? Yes. Polling mechanism for the village? Yeah. Well, I think that we did talk about that, and my feeling on it was, consider yourselves right here what the Procter & Gamble people call this focus group. Yeah, where I'm trying to just hear from residents, self-selecting residents who cared enough to come to this meeting, and see what issues are of concern to you and what your thinking is. And then I think we can construct a poll that would truly inform the elected officials as to where the village residents are at on various subjects. Yes. Okay, I'm game. I'll give you 4 of them. I've got 4 options here for you. They are on the agenda. What? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm trying to, let's just see, let's see where we're at, and then people who want to speak can speak. How many, first, and these are the items in section 2, number 2 of the agenda. How many would favor increasing revenue to continue services at current levels and address projected deficits? Hands?
Mayor?
Okay.
Mayor?
Status quo. Basically, keep everything going the way we provide all the services that we are now providing, recognizing that will require an added proper tax of some sort. Okay, how many would prefer increasing revenue to address projected deficits and undertake additional projects to improve infrastructure and quality of life and appearance in the village? Okay. All right. I think what this tells me is that we're going to have to do a little more work before we do a poll. And that's what I wanted to do here. That's why we're here. All right. I'll finish it. Okay. All right. How many?
Or to do nothing.
That's. Well, that's. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to try it again. Okay. Okay. The first question is, should we have an increase of in millage of 2.5 mils, which would allow us to basically continue providing the services that we are now providing and address the deficits that we are projecting? How many say yes? Okay. Now, okay, Larry, I appreciate the thought, but I really do want to work in the reason behind it. And so, this is, okay. Okay. Try it one more time. A 2.5 mil increase that would allow us to continue providing the services we are providing and address the projected deficits. How many say yes to that? Okay. All right. I'm not counting. I'm just going to ask questions here and get an idea. How many would favor increasing revenue to address projected deficits and this would be either a 4 mil levy or a 0.5% income tax. We'll get to that choice later. But increasing revenue that would allow us to undertake additional projects to improve infrastructure and quality of the village, quality of the appearance. How many favor that? By which means? Either one. We'll get to that. Yeah. Okay. Now we're there. Okay. Okay. How many would favor keeping the revenue of the village at its current level, no tax increase, and reducing or cutting services and projects? Okay. And then, if we were to have a tax increase of substantial amount, how many would prefer a property tax? Okay. How many prefer an income tax? It's about even. Okay. No, it's... Okay.
So the question is, a 2.5 mil additional levy would not generate that much per $100,000 valuation. It would be $87.50 per $100,000 valuation. Correct. That's a 2.5 renewal. That I think that was the income tax total village number, maybe. I'm not sure where that came from.
All right. I do want to let the people who have asked to speak come forward, or really, if anybody wants to speak. But if you've asked to speak, if you've registered, come forward first.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Does that work? Right. My name is Pam Sinnott. I live on Little Creek Lane, and I've lived in Glendale for the past 36 years. I love Glendale. Part of the reason we wanted to move here rather than Wyoming or Sharonville is because we don't have an income tax. It's been delightful not having an income tax. I want to speak against income tax. I want to make sure everybody understands what city tax is. City tax, I'll use the term generally, I know we're a village, but it requires that people pay city tax where they work, and they owe city taxes where they live. First of all, I'll give you just a little bit of background. I, for the past 9 years, have been doing tax counseling for the elderly through AARP as a volunteer tax preparer. So we prepare people's income taxes and submit them to federal and state. When our clients come in and they have city taxes they have to do, we send them to the local council, Sharonville, Evendale, Springdale, and they have people who will help them do their tax returns. It's very, very complicated. In fact, it's really horrible. So that's what I want to put across. You pay where you work, and that means anybody who works 20 days or more in a particular taxing locality has to pay income tax at the rate of that locality. So that would not only include David and Spencer and Sally in the office, everybody else that works in the village, but would potentially even include the people that work at Burwinkle's farm store when they show up, if they're here for 20 days during the year, 2 days a week. Now, that money doesn't go to the residential village. It stays in the bank accounts of Springdale, Blue Ash, wherever it is you work. We don't have many people that work here. So we have a very low base that we can draw on for income tax. We don't have a GE. When P&G built their research center at Mason, Mason expanded their boundaries just so that they could include that research center and all the employees. But we don't have any factories in Glendale, thank goodness. I hope it stays that way. So we would need to be able to help people do their taxes. That would mean we would have somebody who could help them when they take their tax documents along. RITA does not offer that service. RITA is the Regional Income Tax Agency, which just is a tax collection company that works at a fee. A lot of cities don't like paying that fee. It takes money out of the city's revenues. And they allow people to go into the RITA satellite offices where they will help them. But RITA doesn't have any satellite offices around here. They're based in Northeast Ohio. And their nearest offices are Xenia or Hamilton. That's a long way to send people if they need to get their taxes done. To get the taxes done, it's very, very complicated because you've not only got the rate that the city is charging, say your residential city, which could be 0.5%, could be 1% without a ballot, or anything above that if the people agree in the ballot. But then you get the credit. And David mentioned earlier that he's thinking of not having any credit given to people who live in Glendale for the taxes they've paid somewhere else because they work somewhere else. So that is very unfair and is not common. The vast majority of cities do give 100% credit. I know of a couple that only give 50%, and I know of one, and that's Milford, that gives no percent at all credit. So I think that would be a very bad idea and set a bad precedent. Then you've got to work out how we enforce the payment of these taxes. I've heard stories in my tax office work of police stopping for a traffic infringement on Reading Road and ending up writing a citation for somebody not having paid their Evendale taxes. Do we want our police force to be going around doing this with their time? So I think we have a lot of reasons not to do an income tax. And property tax is something we know how to do. It's easy to do it. I do want to say a couple of words about RITA and say that they are very difficult to deal with, and the tax forms are very complicated. You have to file with RITA if you're over 18, whether or not you owe taxes.
Ma'am, you have about a minute.
Okay, thank you. And you have to pay estimated taxes if they're due. If you live in a city and you don't have your taxes withheld, you'd still have to file with RITA. And they only accept filing by mail, so you have to send in all your tax documents. And of course, in a city tax, we're going to be taxing all the businesses in the city, all the people who are self-employed, all the people who have rental property in the city. So it's not just the people that work here or the people that live here. There's a lot of considerations that are going to affect the people that work here. I've loved living here. I've found an article in the Inquirer from 1974 that says Glendale is running out of money and considering implementing income tax. They didn't do it in 1974. They haven't done it since, and I'm hoping that they really won't do it now. It would be a shame if, under the watch of the current council members, this negative step got put into place. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did neglect to mention, but we do have a 5-minute time limit on remarks before council. So who else would like to talk?
If I may, Mayor, just to clarify one point that was made, that all the projections that are presented tonight for a 0.5% income tax would be net revenues received by the village. I know you had mentioned Rita's fee, so that is taken into consideration. So these surpluses that are shown do account for that fee having come out of village's anticipated returns. So just wanted to make sure that was there.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. My name is Ron Vischer. really close. Can you hear me now? Hear me now? Okay. My name's Ron Vischer. I'd like to talk about a way to address the financial needs of the village that really wasn't called out in the meeting agenda, but I'll think you'll agree that it's very important, and that's what is the information we really need to make the right decisions. We've all read about the village's estimated deficits and heard about our needs and opportunities. It appears we need more income, but how do we know how much? Good financial management would provide 3 sets of information. First, more than projections, but rather the current status of our revenues and expenditures. I noticed that all this information is 6 months out of date. It's based on what the budget proposals were back in December of 2021. And I'd like to see at the finance meeting if we could update it with the information we have about how our current revenues and expenses are tracking to see if these projections are coming true or not. The second thing is our financial status. I'd like to see is our financial status based on the current accounting procedures. In the audit we had that was reported in January, we said we would update our accounting procedures, and I'd like to see how those differences in accounting would affect us. And third, the evidence that the numbers that we're using are correct and located in the proper accounts for their intended purpose. Let me discuss each of these. The current status, as I said, was from December 2021 council meeting of the budget approval. The number's already 6 months old. I wondered what the current budget status looks like today. Unlike previous years, no quarterly financial updates have been shared with residents and council or in the finance committee meetings. So they may be posted someplace on the internet. I haven't been able to find them, but I sure would like to know what the current status is 6 months after the budget proposal. We're now almost halfway through the year, and where are these tracking estimates versus the budget? Have our department heads been able to save more than we expected? Or are we in worse shape because inflation is greater than we expected? It could go either way, and that's going to be helpful in making our decision. Second, I also have a question concerning how certain we are of our bookkeeping. In response to the state audit, we wrote that we would be converting to the Uniform Accounting Network beginning in 2022. The auditor had written, the financial statements referred to in our previous audit do not present fairly in accordance with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America, the financial position of the village. And the audit stated that the differences in various accounting approaches could not be determined from looking at only the one approach, but were likely very important. So if these are important and we're converting to the new accounting approach, I'd like to see what those new numbers look like. And I don't know exactly what the status is on our conversion, but I think it is important that we transition to the new accounting software as soon as possible, if we haven't already. Have the important differences been found to improve our situation? Or perhaps they've gone in the other way. I think that's information residents should have. Third, the auditor also wrote, the village did not have procedures in place for effective monitoring of our village's financial activity and the accuracy of our reporting. For example, we didn't compare our bank statements to our books for over 2 years. In the state audit we received in January of this year, the auditor wrote, Council should review and document monthly cash reconciliations and their support so that our bank balances and accounting records align.
You have about a minute.
I think it's important that we do those things and that we have that information as the village considers increasing taxes. Last, we made other commitments to the auditor, including that the village will make the necessary changes to require proper certification of expenditures before paying them. That's because the auditor found that we were paying some bills without documentation of what they were for. We would be careful not to confuse assigned funds and restricted funds. We've done that in the past, and as a result, we haven't been able to spend money on things we could have. We also need to properly reconcile monthly bank statements with their corresponding internal accounts, which for some accounts hadn't been done for years. These steps are basic items, and how are we executing them? I think we need to be executing those things well before we start asking residents for more money.
In conclusion,
Your time has
before we
expired.
increase taxes, add new costly projects, we need to update our financial status, implement the improved accounting software, and ensure effective and accurate monitoring of our financial activity. Increasing taxes and spending without this improved financial management is putting the cart before the horse.
Anybody else want to speak? That's correct.
I'm happy
Go
to
ahead.
address.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, I'll address it right now for you, Ron, if you'd like. So regarding the transfer or the transition to the Uniform Accounting Network, that is work that is underway in our office right now. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we met with the Village of Silverton, who uses the Uniform Accounting Network to obtain information as to how to best transition the identifying numbers and nomenclature for our accounts and how we can best move our finances into that system. It is important to note, though, that would not alter the numbers that exist within our accounting system. That would simply alter the account structures and how those numbers are recorded in the village's books. Now, regarding the comment about the generally accepted accounting principles, the village is, without getting into too many accounting details, does not operate under those accounting principles. Instead, we operate under what's known as cash basis accounting, which is money in and money out, whereas generally accepted accounting principles is accrual-based accounting. I don't want to go into too many of those details just because I'll lose folks if I haven't already. But so when the auditor reviews our financial statements, they're simply stating that we don't use that form of accounting. They're not identifying any flaws or errors within our statements, just that those are not the format that our statements take. As far as mentioning that monthly reconciliations aren't being performed for accounts, let me finish before I'll gladly take questions from you. I just wanted to make sure that I address the points that you were making. That for the village's main bank accounts, our general fund checking, our enterprise fund checking, and our various investment accounts, those monthly reconciliations were being performed. It is one bank account that was not being reconciled, that is our Mayor's Court bank account, that we are undertaking methods to address how to reconcile and continue to reconcile those accounts. So I don't know, Ron, you had your hand. I don't know if you have any additional questions or things you wanted to point out, but I don't want to take up meeting everybody's time tonight going back and forth on this, but to the audit report identifies opportunities for us to improve our accounting system, and we take those seriously. We take that advice from the auditor seriously. But upon conversation with the auditor, closing meetings, reviewing their final audit report, which you can view on the village's website, they were very, very clear in identifying that the village had no material errors in its financial statements, that what data was presented had a few procedural changes that the auditor would prefer based on new guidelines and new guidance. But as far as any material issues with our bank or with our financial statements, the auditor concluded that we did not have any. So we have no reason to believe that our accounting is at all incorrect, especially when it comes to presenting data like this. We certainly would want to make sure that we have our numbers in line before we start trying to inform people on directions for the village into the future. So, I don't know, do you have questions? So, So,
Okay, I think
so
we're, I
what-
think we're going into detail that,
I have one very quick point that I'd like to make, that when we switch to the uniform accounting network, our method of accounting will not change. We will continue to not be in conformance with generally accepted accounting principles because we will not change accounting types from cash basis to accrual basis accounting. That's just simply the nature of our operation. Accrual-based accounting is for larger organizations, larger municipalities. At our size and our scale, cash basis accounting is the standard. So.
does anybody else want to address the group here? What?
Hello, everyone. I didn't expect to be doing this, but I figured why not? You've heard from a longtime resident. I'm a new resident. Just moved in last year with my wife and children. I can tell you, in my personal experience, when we were looking at places to move to, as much as we love our house, I'm a practical man. I did look at overall millage rates on property taxes for many taxing districts in Hamilton County and in Butler County. And I also looked to see whether the taxing district was a part of the RETA system. As you said, I have personal experience with that agency. I've lived in RETA tax districts before, and I can tell you it's a very unpleasant experience. I, for example, lived in a RETA tax district shortly in my youth. I was around 18 or 19, I believe. Right before I joined the Navy, I moved out of the district to join the military. That agency pursued me for money for almost 10 years, money that it was not entitled to. They're a very aggressive agency to deal with, so I will say that. Had that been the case here, it would have been an absolute deal breaker for us to move here, as much as I love the property that we do have now. So I'm fortunate and grateful that RETA is not a part of Glendale right now. I will say, obviously, overall, I would prefer no tax increase. However, I'm a practical man, as I said. I think you have a very good argument to make with the millage, going the millage route. If you look at the data provided by Hamilton County on total millage rate, obviously there's many components to the millage and property taxes. One of them is, for example, the city rate that we've talked about. One is a township. Some people have a township rate on top of a city rate. We do not. And then, obviously, so all those components go to the total. If you look at the total, the average total millage in Hamilton County, published by the Hamilton County Auditor, is 116.37 mils in the last tax year. The Glendale's total is around 113.88. It's slightly under the average, which I thought was pretty impressive. Even a 4 mil increase would not put you at the high end of the total millage rate that people pay in Hamilton County. Now, I am only for increasing it as much as necessary, but I think that you could make a very good argument with the millage route that a slight increase would not be out of the ordinary compared to other taxing districts in our county. However, as I said, with the income tax, that's another animal, and I would not be in favor of that by any means. Thank you.
Does anybody, yes, somebody else does want to speak.
Good evening. Unaccustomed to public speaking as I am. I'm Al Nippert, a member of... I'm Al Nippert, unaccustomed to public speaking as I am. I'm glad to be here tonight, and for those who are the hardcore still sticking around. Just wanted to pass one piece of historic information along. The reason Glendale was looking at perhaps an income tax many years ago, a few years before I entered the village, was because they had very low millage taxes at that point, and we still had very low property taxes at that point before Dusty Rhodes came in and rewrote a lot of the tax bills for Hamilton County. Glendale didn't need to have a heavy consideration for a long time because, as they would say in England, there were death duties. And we've just gotten the last benefit of the death duties, which were with the Carruthers estate, which ended up being misassigned to the city of Cincinnati, and we got it back, fortunately. But that's not going to happen anymore. They've rewritten the Ohio tax code, and that money that we used to get every time somebody who was well-heeled passed away, it doesn't happen. So there are no gift horses coming down the pike, and this is a difficult discussion. I don't envy council and the village to considering it, but it has to be faced. Thank you all very much.
Okay, more? Anybody else? Oh, okay, Mr. Bessel.
I know it's late, I'll be as brief as I can. I know I'm not often brief.
You have 1 minute left.
Thank you, David. And everyone else thanks you too. Thank you again. And thanks everybody for staying so long, and thanks to everyone who came tonight.
Mike,
There's been
closer to the mic.
I got it. There's been a lot of good information shared here, and I'm glad we were able to put this on for everybody. A couple of things, and this is kind of in total transparency. There are some timing issues associated with any type of an increase we choose. For instance, if we did decide we wanted to do an additional millage, we have to do certain filings in the month of July, and we have to do certain filings in the month of August, and if we miss those, we miss that opportunity. My concern as a council person, as I stated in the last meeting, is that if we do nothing right now, our deficit would be $130,000. If we decide to go in income tax, our deficit next year is $130,000 because of the timing of collecting that tax. If we're able to implement a 2.5 mil levy, we will have a surplus next year. I think it's very important for this council to consider that we do not want to run a deficit budget because we're burning village reserves, we're wasting money, we're losing money. So that's important to me, that's number one. So I will be encouraging council in our finance meeting to at least do the first filing, which commits us to nothing. All it does is ask the auditor to certify the revenue generated by a 2.5 mil levy. It makes no commitments, it just certifies that amount. And then we will be in a position to decide one or the other. Regarding roads, I know everyone's concerned about roads and infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewer, etc. Some of the roads in the village right now, repaving around Floral Park mainly and down Ivy, is being held up by one thing, and it's not money. The village does not want to put new pavement down in an area where we have to replace water mains. It's the same as Sharon Road. We waited 3 or 4 years for that to happen because we wanted to have enough money to put a new main in. Now we've repaved it. We don't want to put a repavement down and then have to tear it up for a water main. So something else we'll be talking about in the finance meeting is finding a way to free up some money to be able to replace the mains and then follow along with the paving. And I think that's very important to do because we're losing road bed. So those are some of the, it needs to be a holistic approach. One other thing is also consider the water rates that we do pay, and I don't want to belabor this, but Enterprise is a totally different fund than the general fund, but it is still a cost of living in the village, paying the water bills. So we've got to find a way to deal with these mains that are aging and need to be replaced. Again, the ones on Ivy and up around Floral Park are due and past due. David also mentioned the stormwater and stormwater infiltration into the sanitary lines. Those things have to be dealt with. There are some streets, Woodbine being one, that repavement is being held up by that work. So finding ways to free up money to do the sanitary and storm lines. That's it for me.
Dare I say it? Anybody else? All right. This has, I think, been a great meeting. I think it's a great start to what I said was the conversation that the village elected officials need to have with you, the residents, our constituents, and it's going to continue. And the next event, as I said, is Monday, the 27th at 3 o'clock. Yep, and we're not sure where it's going to be, but we will put out a notice and let you know. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for coming. I have one more item of business. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor, council? Everybody? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.